I used to think that trust was something that you needed to give someone unconditionally until they broke it. Innocent until proven guilty, I suppose. Certainly it was an innocent view, but my aunt had always told me I was far too generous and trusting when I was growing up. Not surprisingly, I no longer think that. Now, my belief is more that while you can trust people, you can only trust them to do what is best for themselves. If you can align your wants and needs with theirs, you can bend them to your will. Schemy and tricky, I know, but hey, I learnt from the best. My name is Mike Michael to my mother, and I am currently existing in Darwin, Northern Australia. I am hiding in this godforsaken hole as it was the furthest I could get at the time I needed to run away. $278 got me a single flight to obscurity with Qantas. I have been here more than 3 years now, ever since I escaped from my life coming down around my ears. Why did I escape, you ask? Well, a bit over 3 years ago, I was living in Melbourne, happily engaged to someone I considered my best friend. We did everything together, and she was the reason I existed. We had met at work, my work, and hit it off almost instantly. At the time, I was driving trams, and she was working an admin job in the office of a company that imported cheap widgets from China. You know the types, the kind of stuff they fill show bags and chappy meals with. The day we met, I was driving into the city in one of the relatively new trams the tram operator had. Now, this particular tram had a big enough driver's cab that there was room for a second seat. It was designed like that for training purposes. As such, it was at a 90-degree angle facing the driver so the trainer could observe the driver's actions. On this particular day, it was rather dark, gloomy, and wet. I was coming through during the peak, and as such, the tram was packed. Annoyingly, at every stop, someone wanted to get either on or off, and as a result, at every stop more wet and miserable passengers tried to board. Now, normally, I don't take great pleasure in other people's misery, but on this day, I was in a bad mood. I can't remember what its reason was, but I was having great delight in watching the poor passengers who couldn't board having to resign themselves from a bit longer of a wait in the rain for the next service. That was until I saw her. We all hear of stories of love at first sight, but I never believed it before. Still don't, as a matter of fact, but there was just something about her that grabbed me. I don't know, maybe it was lust? Amy was a smaller woman, standing at what I later learned was just 5'3". What I first noticed was her long brown hair, which was plastered to her head, her brown eyes, and cute little button nose. I have always liked the smaller fitter, if you will ladies, and she was certainly a sight for sore eyes. Think Natalie Portman's body shape. She was dressed in a standard business attire that showed trim legs and just a hint of cleavage from her perky B-cups. It had been bucketing down, and she had obviously been waiting a while. I had noticed that when the tram stopped, she allowed other people to push in front of her. Well, maybe not allowed, I could tell she wasn't happy with their rudeness, but she wasn't exactly what I would call imposing, and as such was limited in her options. I don't know why I did it, and it wasn't something I had ever done before to a passenger, but I stared at her until she caught my gaze and looked at me. I could only imagine her thoughts on my gaze, but she wasn't expecting me to point at her, and then at the empty seat next to me. In what would become her hook, if you will, she tilted her head to the side and gave me a puzzled look. Indicating with my finger, I pointed to her and then to the front door of the tram. At this stage, I stood up out of the seat and opened the door to the passenger cabin. I got many angry noises from the passengers who had to get back off the tram so I could open the door, but when the passageway between me and the exterior door was clear, she poked her head in and gave me a puzzled look. Much to the interest of other passengers, I asked if she wanted to get out of the rain. Within seconds, she was sitting out of the rain next to me, and we were on the way again. We got chatting, and to my surprise, she rode with me until we reached the terminus. Much to my amazement, when I went to change ends on the tram, she shyly admitted she had meant to get off 10 minutes ago and hadn't wanted to get off. Well, I know an opening when I see one, and as she got up to disembark at her correct stop, I asked if she would like to get together at another stage. Bad mood? What a bad mood. Coffee led to a date, which led to Amy moving into my apartment 6 months later, much to her parents' disapproval. At 26, she was younger than me, but she was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Funny, smart as a whip, sexy and enthusiastic in the sack, and most importantly, she got on well with all of my family. A little too well, I was to learn at a later stage, much to my disadvantage. Her family was in Adelaide, and while I only got to meet her parents once, I had met her younger sister, Elizabeth, a couple of times when she came to visit. At this stage, I suppose it is important to introduce the other actors in my sorry sordid tale. I come from a large family and have 4 younger brothers. At the time I was living in Melbourne and was 32. Robert, the next down, was 26, Jason was 24, Tom was 21, and Tim was just 14, and they all lived in Hobart with my parents. My parents were in their mid-50s and happily married to each other. We had always been close as a family, and as we had grown older and moved, we had always made a point to get together a couple of times a year. We all had the same biting wit and fast minds, which led to lots of jokes and kidding around. Oh, and we all loved to pull a practical joke. 5 months after meeting Amy, it was time for one of our family get-togethers. This particular trip had been long in the planning stage, but we had decided to rent out a rather large houseboat on the Murray River. We were going to pick it up at Murray Bridge in South Australia and spend 2 weeks exploring the river. Splashing out on a bit of luxury, the boat was large enough for each of us to have a separate cabin, with each cabin sporting a queen-size bed. After much deliberation, I hesitantly broke the news to Amy. Suggesting she might like to join me and meet my parents led to an amazing night of what can only be described as full-on monkey sex. As the oldest son, I took my job as chief mischief maker very seriously. As such, I didn't tell anyone that Amy was coming. To be totally honest, I had only really hinted about having a girlfriend at all, so nothing was expected. I won't go into detail, but it was easy to see that Amy was a hit amongst my family. I remember that my father pulled me aside at one stage to tell me that she was a keeper and that he expected me to treat her like a princess. I sometimes look back on this and wish there had been similar advice given to Amy, although I don't expect it would have made much difference. The holiday was a lot of fun, and we came away more. Well, let's call it attracted, shall we? The L word still hurts. In hindsight, one of the things I do remember about the holiday was how well she seemed to get on with my brothers, often taking long walks with them while I relaxed or did something else. At the time, I was just happy that she had gotten on so well with everyone. It also led to me inviting her to move in with me. Naturally, being male, I made the official request weeks after the actual event. 12 months later, and 18 months after meeting Amy, we attended a family reunion at my parents' house. About an hour before dinner one night, I pulled my mother aside and showed her the ring. At the time, I put it down to sadness of losing her eldest son, but her first emotion to me seemed to be sadness. She quickly hugged me and told me it was a beautiful ring, before excusing herself to find my father. I was so excited and nervous myself at the time that I didn't pick up on her unease, but once again, in hindsight, it was clear that something wasn't right. That night I proposed. After much shocked silence, she said yes. It wasn't the amazing yes I was hoping for, but at the time the way she said yes wasn't important. What was that she had said yes. In the weeks that followed our engagement, we talked a lot about our ideal relationship, what we wanted, and what we thought the future held. Up until that point, we had sort of skirted the issue like any new relationship. Me not wanting to be the first to bring it up so as to not appear needy or anything. She admitted that I had surprised her with my feelings, and that she needed time to come to terms with things and work out her headspace, whatever that meant. Being the generous soul I was, I insisted she take as much time as she needed, and that there was no need to set a date until she felt comfortable with it. Weeks later, Amy announced to me that she had been invited down to my parents' house for a girls' weekend with my mother. I was particularly surprised at this, as I hadn't thought that she had been in touch with my mother or even the rest of my family. She explained that she didn't want it to be weird, but she wanted to just get away for a weekend by herself for a change to let loose and have some fun. I knew she didn't have many friends in Melbourne, so to me it sounded reasonable, plus I was delighted that she had gotten on so well with my mother. On the Friday night after work, I drove her to the airport. During the drive, Amy had seemed distracted and preoccupied, but I had just put it down as stress. After all, up until that point, I had always been there with her whenever any of my family were around. When I picked her up from the airport on Sunday night, she seemed quiet and withdrawn. I could see something was bothering her, but thought it best to give her the space she needed to deal with whatever was bothering her. By the time we had returned home, she seemed to have returned to her usual self, although I could detect a trace of sadness. There were a few moments during the drive when I had caught her watching me, and I am sure there was a tear or few. Being the typical male, I had not really taken any notice. That night in bed, she seemed more clingy than normal, and where she would normally drape herself over me after our lovemaking to fall asleep, she seemed to want to hold me tight, not that I was complaining. The week continued in the same vein, and I often found her watching me with moist eyes. I didn't bring it up or make a deal with it, figuring it had something to do with my recent proposal. The one time I had brought it up, I was quickly told that I was being silly and that she loved me. On Thursday night, I had a phone call from my parents, and they surprised me with the news that they would be in Melbourne for the weekend and wanted to get together. Surprisingly, Robert was making the trip, and they had booked rooms at a nearby hotel. Being football season, I wasn't surprised that he was coming and assumed that he was coming so as to catch an Aussie rules game. I arranged to pick them up at the airport on a Saturday morning. Having only a 4-seater car, Amy had elected to stay at home. When I met them at their gate, they all seemed to be cheerful, although I did notice that Robert didn't make his usual wisecracks. They were keen to catch up with Amy and suggested a nice lunch somewhere. While waiting for their luggage, I called her, and she suggested a pub close to their hotel that had been recently renovated and now served nice meals. Dropping them off at the airport, I had dashed home to pick up Amy. Coming home, I found her wearing one of her favorite dresses and sitting on the bed staring out the window. As I entered the bedroom, she turned to look at me, and I noticed her eyes looked like she had been crying. Wondering what could be the problem, I took a step forward so as to comfort her. As I did, a panicked look came across her face, causing me to stop in surprise. I must say that my first thought was that she looked afraid of me, and this puzzled me greatly. We stared at each other for a few minutes before she stood and brushed past me, saying that we should hurry as we didn't want to keep them waiting. She almost ran towards the bathroom, closing the door. I must say that at this point, alarm bells started going off. It wasn't full-blown panic, but I knew something wasn't right, and that I had either done something very wrong or something was majorly amiss. Moving slowly towards the door, for the first time I noticed one of Amy's small suitcases just outside the bedroom door. Amy came out of the bathroom a few minutes later to find me staring at her suitcase. With a gasp, I heard her stop, and I slowly shifted my gaze to her face. Up until that point, I had just been confused, thinking I had pissed her off somehow, but when she refused to meet my eyes, I started to feel sick. After a few minutes, she moved over and picked up the suitcase. Mumbling something about being late, she carried the suitcase out the door. In a daze, I did the obligatory male 4-point check and followed her into the lift. We rode to the basement car park in silence, before getting in the car. To this day, I don't remember to drive to the restaurant. All I can remember is sitting there in the car park after we had arrived, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what was going on. Obviously, something was going on, but what? Why? Where? What did it all mean? After what seemed like an eternity, Amy softly suggested we should go in and get this over with. Her words, "get this over with," confused me, and I climbed out of my car and stood looking at her as she took her suitcase off the back seat. As she closed the door, she looked up at me, finally meeting my eyes. I will remember the look in those beautiful eyes until the day I die. She had always had the most beautiful brown eyes, the windows into her soul, I used to call them. Usually a pleasure to look into. At that moment, they were the saddest eyes I had ever seen. With a sob, she turned and hurried to the restaurant entrance, disappearing inside. In a daze, I followed. Entering the restaurant, I saw my parents and my brother sitting at a table next to the window. The table was a long table, with 2 seats on either side and 1 seat at the head of the table with the other end of the table against the window. My parents sat on one side of the table while Robert sat on the other side. As Amy was sitting down next to my brother, I thought it was weird that Robert would choose to sit there, as it meant that Amy and I weren't sitting next to each other on the same side. Ever had tunnel vision? Where one minute there is a big wide world around you with noise, sound, smell, and activity, and the next minute you couldn't tell if you were on fire? Yeah, me neither before that. She had reached out and grabbed his hand. Grabbed it like it was the last life preserver on a sinking ship. I noticed that his hand went white. Then I noticed that neither of my parents were looking at me, but at Amy holding Robert's hand as well. Finally, my mother turned to me and suggested I take a seat. I don't remember sitting down, but I do remember my mother putting her hand on my arm. She didn't say anything, or at least I don't remember any words. At this point, the waiter arrived and started handing out menu. Talk about comic timing, huh? I think he realized he had interrupted something as he disappeared almost as fast as he arrived. I dropped my eyes and stared at the menu. I couldn't tell you what I was wearing, but I remember every single detail on that menu. Oh, I don't remember the words or what was on the menu that day, but I remember the small sauce stain over the entree heading. I remember the dog-eared corner. The bottom was where the laminated pages were starting to separate. Then I heard the words that I had fantasized about hearing from a woman that I loved since I was young. Those words brought both terror and absolute, unbridled joy at the same time to any husband or boyfriend the first time he heard them. They were spoken so softly that I almost didn't hear them. I can't exactly remember what was said after those three little words, but it was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of my lungs. I am sure that I wavered between consciousness there for a few seconds because the next thing I remember was my mother, from what seemed a great distance, saying my name. I ignored her and managed to focus on Amy's face. She dropped her gaze before looking at my brother. I followed her gaze and found myself looking at my brother. He had an awkward look on his face, and after a few minutes, he nodded at me, before turning to Amy and kissing her lips. The lips that I slowly realized I would never kiss again. If you had seen me at that moment, I am sure I aged 20 years in an instant. Slowly, I realized my mother was still saying my name. I turned to her and saw the pain in her eyes. Oh crap, they had known all along, and if they knew, my brothers knew. Then I realized that my father was speaking. Something about respecting their wishes. Giving them space. Blah, blah, blah. Something else. All I heard was giving them space. I would have loved to see my face the instant I understood everything. It must have happened when I heard the words giving them space, because at that moment my mother went pale. Once again, time stood still. I reviewed what I knew. I thought about what I wanted at that very moment and realized that I could give them what they wanted and what I needed at the same time. I stood up. Suddenly. That was a mistake, as everything swam before my eyes. Low blood pressure can be a bitch sometimes. My mother gripped my arm. My father stood suddenly as well. I am not sure why, but who knows? I no longer cared. I saw Amy cringe. I saw fear in Robert's eyes. I looked at them. I hoped they were happy. I know I wasn't. I turned and ran. Literally. Out the door. Down the street. I saw a taxi. I hailed it. 40 minutes later, I was at the airport. 30 minutes later, I had my ticket. $278 worth of escape. Sick of iPhone going nuts. Have nothing to say. HM. The little kid looks bored. Pac-Man should keep him happy for a while. Call's now his problem. No luggage. No ties. No past. No trust. I was lying on my bed in that mental place between being drunk lucid and being just plain drunk. Thoughts rambled through my head, and if you had asked me what day it was, or even what I was wearing, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, or possibly even focus on your face. The latest bottle empty, I had been laying on my back staring at the fan slowly spinning on the ceiling. Empty. Devoid of any interest in, well, anything really. I had stopped going to the pub to drown my sorrows and had started just drinking at home. When I first started going to the pub, it had been for a few drinks and a bit of social interaction. It also leads to a job offer. As the days wore on, though, I started to resent the place. Oh, the prices were reasonable, the atmosphere pleasant, but it was hard sitting there watching lovers do the tonsil dance and be all lovey-dovey with each other. Many times I had wanted to. Well, I am not sure what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something. In the end, it all became too much, and I started just staying home and drinking. Plus, it was cheaper, especially when I started drinking the cheap stuff. I had gotten a crappy laborer job to pay the bills, and as long as I turned up and didn't kill myself, they didn't care how drunk I was. I had started to take full advantage of that situation. It helped me forget. Way back when, I hadn't really thought my actions through other than just wanting to get away, hadn't even thought about money. All I knew at the time was that I needed to get as far away from that place as possible, and quickly. On the flight up, I had plenty of time to think, and the one thing I had decided was that I didn't want to touch my money, or should I say our money. At the time, as part of the arrangements for getting married, we had set up joint bank accounts. Salary is split into bill accounts, credit card payments, and savings accounts. Savings accounts for weddings, for school for planned kids, all sorts of crazy stuff. Nothing would ever come of that now, but in my mental state at the time, I hadn't wanted to go near anything that reminded me of her. Of us. Plus, to me, touching any of the bank accounts would have given her. Well, it would have been some sort of contact, some acknowledgement of existence. I didn't think she deserved that. But now, lying on my bead, I can hear her voice. Or can I? I strained to hear it, suddenly focused for the first time in ages. It sounds concerned, but as I struggle to decipher her words, it slowly drifts away. Words aren't needed to make me nervous. Simply the sound of her voice makes my heart go nuts. After a few minutes of silence, I snigger to myself at the thought of her being here. Why would she? She had obviously never cared about me to have done what she did or how she had. But no, nothing further was heard. Obviously, my mind was playing tricks on me again. In the weeks and months that had followed my arrival in Darwin, I had often thought I had seen or heard her from afar. Someone would laugh, sounding just like her, and my head would snap around. My eyes panicked, not sure if I wanted it to be her or not. Other times, someone would slink by with a similar hairstyle and I would panic, not knowing whether to run or play possum. I had often dwelled over it, wondering if I would ever forget anything about her. Ex-lovers always hold a certain place in your heart, and to be truthful, I think it would have been impossible for me to ever forget it. I used to sometimes wonder if I actually did want to forget it. The hurt and pain were what kept me going these days. What would I do without it? Before she had come into my life, I had been just going through the motions. Now, post-Amy, I was once again going through the motions. Return to the normal circle of life, right? I awoke sometime later. It was dark, so I checked my watch to see if I should be at work yet. 4 a.m. Almost time. Breakfast was, well, there was no breakfast. Once upon a time, I had made an effort to eat properly. Cereal for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, and something healthy for tea. Now, I ate what was available when I wasn't drinking, that is. Actually, I probably ate more while I was drinking than when I wasn't. Munchies seemed to arrive about the 5th drink these days, and with a Macca's down the road within stumbling distance, I never saw the need to actually buy groceries from the supermarket. As far as I was concerned, the supermarket was for booze. Oh, and cigarettes. I had started smoking. Not sure why, I had never smoked before. A quick shower to wash away, well, I couldn't actually think why I bothered. I sweated all day in the heat and the humidity, and would start to smell as soon as I stepped out into the big bad world. Certainly, by the time I arrived at work, I would be all sweaty. It was a 2K walk without a car. Habit, I suppose. Once upon a time, a hot shower in the morning had to wake me up, but now, being awake didn't seem to be the challenge it once was of morning. After about 10 minutes of walking, I arrived at the supermarket. It was one of those 24-hour jobbies near the main highway. Booze was stocked, and available not just cheaply, but in bulk. 1 liter of bourbon for $24? Bargain. 1 on the way to work, 1 on the way home. The boss said something about an inspection today, so to play safe, I bought a couple of 2-liter bottles of Pepsi. Something to mix it would make it go further and give me some sense of deniability. Scratching around in my wallet, I find the needed change. As usual, my finger lingers over the old plastic fantastic, the joint credit card. I should throw it out, but like the photo, it helps me maintain the rage. Double-bagged purchases in hand, I stumble out. Time to stop for a quick taste or not? The start time is 5 a.m., currently 4:47. Decision made, I break the seal and take a quick gulp from the bottle. By the time I reach work, I have regained the buzz. I stumble into my office, falling against the light switch. The gas lights take ages to heat up, so it's still dark as I fumble my way to the little boy's room. Fortunately, there are plenty of props to hold me up as I empty my bladder. By the time I make my way back to my little office, the lights are starting to wake up. It will be some time until the lights are bright enough to see the interior of the workshop I hide in, but that suits my eyes. I am a TA to a quick lime producer. TA means trades assistant. In other words, bitch. I do all the shit jobs that the fitters and mechanics don't want to do, but I am usually by myself and get left alone. On my wall, Miss March is smirking at me, mocking me. She knows what March means to me. We were to get married in March. In March in Australia, the summer days are long. It was to be a late afternoon wedding, after a party with drinks and a catered barbecue in our favorite local park. 9 p.m. darkness. Invited guests going on to drinks at our local pub. The very same I had. The very same where my heart now lay broken. I opened my locker. Overalls, helmet, boots, tool belt, grease gun. Walked out into the yard, heading towards the office. Signed on and grabbed the radio. Turned it on low for selective deniability. Grabbed the first work order. Seems crusher number 3 is playing up again. I hate having to crawl inside that thing. In case you have never come across it, quicklime burns in contact with water. Or sweat. Crusher 3 crushed the cooked quicklime into the desired size. 3 mil, 5 mil, whatever. Usually it took 3 or 4 hours to fix, and by the time I was finished, I had burns over all exposed skin. I like to complain, but in reality it was a job that needed focus for 3 or 4 hours, and anyway, the pain seemed to take the focus off, other painful things. Plugging in my iPod, I got to work. 3 hours later, I felt eyes on the back of my head. I still hadn't managed to find the fault and was starting to get frustrated. No matter what I did, I couldn't get the damn thing to work. Crawling around inside of it for a number of hours had me looking like a ghost, all white. I had burns on my neck, wrists, hands, and face. All I needed now was for one of the smart-ass operators to be peering over my shoulder. I decided to ignore it. That was until small rocks started to bounce off my helmet. I am not an angry man, but the constant stream of small rocks bouncing off my helmet eventually got to me. In an effort to calm myself, I slowly secured my tools and crawled out of the giant crusher. Pinching my nose, I slowly raised my eyes to see my supervisor standing in front of me. As usual, he looked pissed. Not the good pissed, mind you, just plain mad. With a jerk of his thumb, he climbed down from the platform that serviced the access panel to the crusher. I had been summoned. Sighing, I followed as he headed to his vehicle. Not waiting for me, he sped off to the office. 5 minutes later, as I approached the office on foot, I noticed the police car. Standing next to it were 2 officers dressed in their browns. Curious, I slowed my approach. What did they want? Why was I needed in the office? Was there any relation between the two? Approaching the office, the officers moved to intercept me. Not good. Never good. After looking between me and his folder for a few minutes, one of the officers spoke my name in a manner that indicated it was both a question and a statement. I nodded. They then asked my date of birth and my place of birth. I showed them my driver's license. They looked at each other before the silent one asked me whether I knew that there had been a missing persons report filed for me. My first thought was after 4 and a bit years, why now? Then I remembered hearing Amy's voice last night. I had that awful sinking feeling that I used to get when called to the principal's office. You know the one when you have been caught, once again, spitballing the ceiling in English? I thanked them and advised them that I was fine. They asked a few questions before one of them smiled and commented on how nice it was to get a positive outcome for a change. If they were looking for me, it meant that someone else was looking for me. Someone whom I most likely didn't want to talk to. I entered the office to find the boss on the phone. I waited until he finished. I quit, asked for the final pay in cash. He laughed and said he would pay it when he got around to it and that I wouldn't be getting paid out my sick or annual leave because I hadn't given notice. I left the office, heading for my locker, not so much to dump my stuff, but to get the bourbon. Opened the fridge to get my Pepsi, and found someone had already drunk half of one of the bottles. Slamming the fridge door shut in frustration, I left the Pepsi. Shit. Could this day get any worse? Changing my shoes, I stood to leave. One of the mechanics was leaning on the wall watching me. He didn't say a word as I picked up the bottle of bourbon by the neck and took a long drink. I walked past him without a word, heading to who knows where. But first, my room. My meager possessions. A few shirts. My iPad. A backpack. As I trudged down the road, I tried to figure out where to go next. I had heard of plenty of work in the mines in Queensland, or I could head west to the mines in Western Australia. Maybe an oil or gas platform. I had a bit of money saved in my passport. How about north to Bali? Lie on a beach. Escape. Become a nobody. One foot in front of the other, I let my mind wander. Was this what my life was destined to be? One lurch to another? Or was there an easier way out? Entering the home stretch, I wondered whether I might be better off hiding closer rather than further away. Back to Melbourne? Then I saw a shiny new hire car parked in front of my apartment. Then, I stumbled to a halt as I saw them all standing on the step in front of the room door. My parents. My brother. Amy. God, she looked good, and a little squirming bundle in her hands. As if sensing my presence, Amy turned to look in my direction. Quickly, she turned to my brother and said something. I would like to think that by the time they turned back, I was gone, but I will never know if they saw me or not. As I hid in the Macca's car park, I stared at my shaking hands. I had dropped my bag and the bourbon as I had turned and ran, and had briefly felt a loss as the bottle had shattered on the road. Now, more than ever, I needed its memory-reducing smoothness. Amy and I had always used a condom. That meant I was an uncle. As darkness fell, I tried to decide what to do. I had sat in the car park for the last couple of hours, watching people coming and going. Families, kids, old people. I had particularly been fascinated by an old couple who had come in. He had gotten out and walked around the car to open her door. They kissed after she had gotten out. Idly, with nothing better to do, I pondered them. Random thoughts. Was she his wife? Did they love each other? What secrets did they keep from each other? What lies was their relationship built on? I hated them without knowing them. I was trying to decide where to go, what to do. I was now out of a job. I had money in the bank, but I didn't know how long it would last. Oh, and the big one, did I want to chance going back for my stuff? Going back for it meant that I would risk seeing them again. I suppose if I had thought about it, the thing I feared the most was more them seeing me again. I wasn't sure what I really thought about them anymore. Me, them, us. To be totally honest, I was quite angry with them. Well, I was a lot of things, particularly when it came to Amy and my brother, but at the moment, anger seemed to be number one on the list. How dare they come back? First, they ask me to give them space, and then they make a point to come into my space. One thing I particularly hated my parents for at that point was their insistence that I always look at any problem from the perspective of the other person. Oh, don't for a moment think I was prepared to even think about caring about, nor understanding their point of view, but I couldn't help but wonder why they had gone to the effort to all come. I mean, why now? And the one that puzzled me the most, why all of them? As I sat there, I decided that I wouldn't let them stop getting my things. After all, it was all I had left. Everything else was all back in. Melbourne? With a sigh, I stood and started a long, slow amble back to my room. I did keep an eye out, but didn't see them anywhere near my door. I had stood in the shadows for a few minutes just to make sure, but didn't see anyone. The hire car was still parked in front of the room, but I didn't see them anywhere. Almost guiltily, I sneaked around to my front door. I paused at the door, just in case. Silent. No light from under the door. Summoning what courage I had left, I turned the key. There was no handle to turn, just a cheap handle for pulling the door closed. I eased the door open to a darkened room. Slipping into my room, I quietly shut the door behind me. I thought about turning on the light, but there was enough illumination coming in through the window to see my way to the dresser against the wall. My bag was on top, along with my charging iPad. Disconnecting the iPad's power cord, I looped the cord neatly before putting it in the front pocket of my backpack. Having filled my small bag with everything I owned, I scanned the room looking for anything I had forgotten. Nope. Got it all. As I slipped out, I wondered what to do with the key. I had paid by the month in advance and was paid up for another 2 weeks. I had paid a bond of 2 weeks' rent up front, so I supposed I needed to return my key to get it back. Maybe I could even get a refund on the rest of the rent. Approaching the office, I had to pass by the communal kitchen and laundry. It was a pretty crappy setup, but it seemed popular with families who were looking for budget accommodation. The kitchen was large and reasonably well set up with lots of pots, pans, plates, cutlery, and all the other stuff usually found in the kitchen. Walking past the open door, I glanced inside and stopped. I looked down. My hands were shaking again. I screwed up my hands in a fist. In that split second, I had seen them. My mother at the stove, cooking. Amy leaning forward across the table, a baby being fed from a jar. And my brother talking with my father. A little girl playing with a doll on the ground. Without thinking, I turned to the wall. Cheap sheet plaster doesn't survive contact with a fist. As I pulled my fist back out of the wall, I was suddenly aware of the silence. Clenching my jaw, I turned, intent on heading to the office to hand in my key. I had taken a single step when I heard my name behind me. Quiet. Almost a whisper. and in a voice I knew so well. I paused for a second. Heartbeats, aware of silence all around. My fist throbbing. A whispered plea. I couldn't help myself. I turned. She was standing in the door. She looked so small, afraid, alone, beautiful. I wanted to hug her, wrap myself in her. I heard sounds from within the room, people moving. My brother poked his head around the door. We stared briefly at each other. I noticed his hand on her shoulder. She reached up to grab it, gripping it, holding on to it for dear life. She had never grabbed my hand like that. I stared at them. A sob escaped Amy's lips. She looked everywhere but at me. From within the kitchen, I hear my father. He was always the poet. No, I did not want to come in. No, I did not want to talk about it. About us. What was there to talk about anyway? There was no longer an us. My mother added her pleas. We needed to talk, supposedly. I thought it was interesting they were happy to shout from the kitchen, but not look me in the face. I stared at my brother. He looked defiantly back. I remember as a young kid hitting him when he broke my toys, telling him to leave me alone so I could play with my things. Playing with my friends, he always wanted to join in. My mother had always scolded me, telling me to let him join in. Reluctantly, I had been often guilted into including him. Not this time. With a shake of the head, he turned Amy and they headed back into the kitchen. Sobs. Over the shoulder, the tough man throws away lines, each one in anger. I wanted to shout back that yes, I did understand love. And no, I didn't understand. I never would. But most importantly, I wanted to shout, what about me? Standing there, I realized that there was a little girl standing in the doorway looking at me. She wanted to know why I had made her mummy cry. I stared at her. Cute. Blonde. A little Amy. Hands on hips, just like her mother. She approached me. Kicked me in the shin. I stared in amazement. My brother appeared. He grabbed her around the waist, lifting. She struggled. Neither looked at me. Since when was I the bad guy? I suddenly realized I was furious. Anger, rage, most importantly, frustration. I took 2 steps. Standing at the door, I couldn't help myself. I yelled. I shouted. I raged. How dare they? I don't know what I said. I don't know how long I shouted. All I remember was eventually being forced to the ground. Handcuffs. I felt lightheaded. Flashing red and blue lights. A cell. I was released in the morning. The first thing I did was visit the post office and purchase a prepaid envelope. I had written a short letter while waiting to be released. I was sober, so I was released without charge. The letter was very much to the point. 3 words, in fact. Leave me alone. As I posted the letter, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Idly, I wondered if there were any good jobs around. Then I realized that I did actually like it here. Shorts and a t-shirt year-round, and they had cute barmaids. I nodded. This was home. I wondered where my iPad was. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.